Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for this webinar on Census Frequently Asked Questions. This is the first webinar in a series of monthly webinars that we'll be doing on the census. There will be time for Q&A at the end of this webinar, and this webinar is also being recorded, and we'll share the presentation and recording with you following the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started.
Hi everybody, this is Ao Minnis, Director of Census and Voting Programs here at Advancing Justice AAJC. We will get started. I'm going to cover a lot of information, so feel free to please either write questions in the chat box and or hold your questions. We will have an opportunity to do a Q&A session after I get through these slides. Okay, so let's start. So as required by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, the census must be taken every 10 years and must count everyone. In fact, the census is the foundation for representation in our democracy. Census data are also critical for civil rights enforcement, including enforcement of voting rights, employment, fair housing, education, and so on. Unfortunately, one ongoing issue with the census is that it is not an equal opportunity enumeration, which has implications for civil rights enforcement and other uses of census data. While we know that the census will never be a perfect count, the reality is that the real issue is that not all demographic groups are missed at roughly the same rate. People of color are missed at disproportionately high rates, while non-Hispanic whites and higher income households are overcounted often, as was the case in 2010. Furthermore, the people who are more likely to be missed in the census don't live in the same communities as the people who tend to be overcounted or double counted. So the mistakes in the census don't cancel each other out at the local level, they actually compound each other, and the inequities that flow from that skewed picture. This means that those most often missed will lose out on their fair share of money and power allocations. Now, the constitutional mandate to count every person in the country is done for the purpose of reapportioning the 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives to the states as determined by population size for the next 10 years, that is, until the next census. So based on the most recent population projections, we anticipate seeing a possible shift from Midwest and Northeastern states to the South and the West. New York, Illinois, Ohio, and Minnesota could lose a seat. Texas, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona could gain seats. Census data are also used to redraw the lines of those seats, as well as at the state and local level. One thing that's interesting to note, of course, is that due to some changes that have happened, and the potential for increased undercounts in different communities, and particularly immigrant communities, those recent population projections could be completely outdated now because of what we may see moving forward. Census data also informs the distribution of federal, state, and local dollars, including about 300 federal programs that allocate over $800 billion a year. And of course, census data are critical to guiding decisions and planning for the government, for businesses, and for nonprofits, right? And trying to figure out how to utilize the resources that are allocated. Census data really helps to guide the planning, without which we cannot effectively or efficiently use our limited resources to address the significant needs of our communities. So earlier this decade, Congress instructed the Census Bureau to take the 2020 census for the same amount as the 2010 census. And this did not even account for inflation. This has led the Census Bureau to redesign the 2020 census, guided primarily by cost-saving concerns, which has resulted in some positive and some negative implications in their design. So let's first take a look at the overarching structure of the 2020 census operations. The first step in conducting the 2020 census is identifying all of the addresses where people could live, or establishing where to count. An accurate address list helps ensure that everyone is counted. Another way to think about it is, if you're not on the address list, you'll likely not get counted for the census. Unlike previous censuses, the Census Bureau will conduct most of its address canvassing in office for the 2020 census, rather than a 100% canvassing of all households in the country by people. That is, people going in the field and walking block to block, noting the households and the addresses that they come across. In-office address canvassing is the process of using empirical geographic evidence, that is, imagery and comparisons of the Census Bureau's address list to partner-provided lists or third-party data sources to assess the current address list. This process detects and identifies changes using high-quality imagery, administrative data, and third-party sources to review and update the address list. This office work will also determine which parts of the country require canvassers to go into the field to verify address information, which is anticipated to cover approximately 30% of all addresses. In-field address canvassing will focus on areas where address updates cannot be obtained or verified, or in areas undergoing rapid change. The Census Bureau will make a final determination on which areas will be canvassed using in-field address canvassing by March 2019. And there will continue to be some in-office address canvassing until March 20th to continue improving the address list. The next stage addresses the fact that response rates to surveys and censuses have been declining. Our current climate and recent political climate and recent decisions will only exacerbate response rates or the decline in response rates. To motivate people to respond, the 2020 census will include a nationwide communications and partnership campaign. This campaign is focused on getting people to self-respond, and advertising will make heavy use of digital media, tailoring the message to the audience. In 2020, the Census Bureau moves to count the population by collecting information from all households, including those residing in group or unique living arrangements. We'll get more into that in a minute. The last step in the 2020 census is to release the 2020 census results. The 2020 census data will be processed and sent to the president for apportionment purposes by December 31st, 2020, and to the states for redistricting by April 1st, 2021. And then finally to the public through their data products beginning in December 2021. Next, we'll go over the timeline for some key census activities. The Census Bureau will be opening 6 regional census centers in 2018. And now I'm going to go through the 6 regional offices and let you all know which states those offices will be serving. So first, we have the Atlanta Regional Office, and that will be serving the states of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and of course the state in which the office resides. The next regional office is in Chicago. So it will cover Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, and Wisconsin. The Denver Regional Office will cover Arizona, Colorado, Kansas, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. Moving on to the next slide, we have the Los Angeles Regional Office, which will cover Alaska, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. The New York Regional Office will cover Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And finally, we have the Philadelphia Regional Office covering Delaware, the District of Columbia, Kentucky, Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. In 2019, we will see the opening and staffing of 248 area census offices, and these were called local census offices during the 2010 census. We will see phase 1 of the communications campaign, and finally, the recruitment of temporary census workers will begin. In 2020, we'll have our final march to the census. So we'll start with the enumeration in remote Alaskan villages, and that will start in late January. We'll see the national advertising campaign go into full swing with its awareness phase in January and February, and its motivation phase in March, April. We will have an upcoming webinar about the communication efforts focusing on both the Census Bureau and our own plans and research around messaging and outreach. The Bureau will continue hiring and training of its temporary staff in the beginning of 2020. The Census Questionnaire Assistance, which provides telephonic assistance to potential respondents, will be up and running mid-January through July. The self-response phase is from mid-March through early May, and then the Census Bureau will move into non-response follow-up, also affectionately known as NRFU, and that will last through July. Finally, the Census Bureau will submit the reapportionment and state population to the President as required by law by no later than December 31st. The Census Bureau wants to make it easy for people to respond anytime and anywhere. The various methods of enumerations include service-based enumeration, so that's of emergency living quarters and targeted non-shelter outdoor locations, focusing on the homeless population, and that'll occur end of March. We have enumeration of transitory locations such as campgrounds, marinas, RV parks, hotels, motels, and that will go on between March and April. And then we'll see enumeration of group quarters. Those include military barracks, college dorms, skilled nursing homes, and prisons, and that will happen in April. We also will see the update, enumerate, and update leave operations in 2020. So this will be operations that cover about 12 million homes in rural and remote areas that do not have reliable or direct mail delivery. This will occur tentatively March and April with, of course, as I mentioned before, the remote Alaskan villages starting in late January. Then self-response will be mid-March through early May, and non-response follow-up May 13th through July. So our next webinar in our series will delve more into these other ways of counting people. Today, I'm going to focus on the self-response and non-response follow-up methods of counting. The 2020 census will offer the opportunity and encourage people to respond by the internet, and will encourage but not require people to enter a unique census identification with their response. The Census Bureau is looking to optimize self-response as it costs significantly less to process a response provided by the internet or through a paper form than it does to send an enumerator to someone's home to collect the response. To optimize self-response, the Census Bureau is making it easy for people to respond from any location at any time. So this will be accomplished in a number of ways. First, the Census Bureau allows people to respond via multiple modes, that is through the internet, by paper, or the telephone if they call the Census Questionnaire Assistance Center. They will also allow respondents to submit a questionnaire without a unique identification code, and they will also provide online forms in multiple languages so people can respond in language. So overall, the Census Bureau estimates that 60.5% of households that receive mailouts or hand delivery of materials from the Census Bureau will self-respond in one of these three modes, that is the internet, paper, or telephone, prior to beginning of the non-response follow-up activities, with 45% actually responding via the internet. In addition to responding via one of these three modes, there will be an opportunity to respond even if one does not have a pre-assigned unique ID for the household via the internet within the self-questionnaire assistance via the internet or within with the Census Questionnaire Assistance. So non-ID processing is an effort to associate census responses that lack a census ID with records included in the Census Bureau's address frame. So this is important and is actually similar in concept to the Be Counted forms that were used in 2010 by many of the CBOs to help ensure our community members get counted. And this is an opportunity for people who, if they've heard about the census but never received a letter or a questionnaire in the mail, to be able to still participate. So after the self-response phase, we'll move into the non-response follow-up. And the 2020 census NRFU operations are actually going to be different from what we saw in 2010. And this will focus on the utilization of administrative records and third-party data to reduce the workload, and a re-engineering of staffing and management of field operations. So during NRFU, enumerators or census takers will visit each household or housing unit designated for follow-up. Every case in the NRFU workload will have a maximum of 6 unique contacts. So the Census Bureau plans on using administrative data exclusively from federal administrative records to improve the accuracy and efficiency of NRFU operations by 1, removing vacant housing units and non-residential addresses from the non-response follow-up workload, and then 2, to enumerate households that do not self-respond and whom they were not able to contact after 6 mailings and 1 in-person field visit. So the Census Bureau plans to use administrative data only when it can confirm empirically across multiple sources that the data are consistent, of high quality, and can be accurately applied to the addresses and households in question. Where the Census Bureau does not have confidence in the data, such as when the data are inconsistent or missing in the federal administrative records, the household will remain in the non-response follow-up workload and will receive more in-person visits. So we do have an overall concern about the use of administrative records because we know that there really isn't good quality race data for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, or Pacific Islanders generally in these data sets, and they certainly don't have good data on the detailed breakouts that we need to be able to effectively do the work that we do. Additionally, the field infrastructure to support the non-response follow-up activities has also been revamped for the 2020 census. And it's been revamped to focus on streamlining office and staffing structure, increase the use of technology, and increase the management and staff productivity. So one thing to note is that the 2020 census field infrastructure is being cut virtually in half from what we saw in 2010. Both with respect to the number of regional offices and local census offices, as well as the actual workforce. So that is to say that of the number of census workers who will be working on the in-field activities, we will have half the amount as we had in 2010. Some of this is based off of the idea that their new reliance on technology will help manage the workload and the workflow, and therefore they don't need as many people on staff to be able to do the work. But we know that this over-reliance on technology is actually problematic for our community. Not only do we not have enough people as we did last time, and therefore making it all that more important that the people that are hired are the right people and people from our communities and people who have the linguistic and cultural knowledge to be able to effectively connect with people who are already disinclined to participate in the census. But we know that the hiring and recruitment process will be completely online. And so that clearly will make it more difficult for some of our community members from hard to count communities to access the process, and therefore harder to get our folks actually hired to be the census taker and the enumerators and the person interfacing with those in our communities. At the same time, the Census Bureau is also considering ending their policy of hiring LPRs to serve as interpreters, translators. And of course, that would further limit the Census Bureau's ability to hire the right people to conduct non-response follow-up activities. We'll next look at how the Census Bureau plans to contact households about the census through their contact strategies for mailing materials. Contact strategies for mailing materials refers to all attempts by the Census Bureau to make direct contact with individual households by mail. Types of contact strategies include invitation letters, postcards, and actual questionnaires mailed to households. The first contact strategy is Internet First. In trying to get a majority of self-respondents to complete their census questionnaire online, the first mailing in the Internet First strategy includes an invitation to respond to the census online. The second contact strategy is Internet Choice, and is for areas with low internet coverage or connectivity, or other characteristics that may make it less likely that respondents will complete the census questionnaire online. The first mailing for Internet Choice includes both an invitation to complete the census online, but also a paper questionnaire. The Census Bureau anticipates about 20% of the households will receive the internet choice treatment. Of course, both mailing strategies have the objective of maximizing self-response to the 2020 census, thereby minimizing the non-response follow-up activities and keeping costs in check. So on this slide, you can see how the two different contact strategies will work. While all non-responding households in the Internet First area will eventually receive a paper questionnaire, you see that in the fourth mailing, households in Internet Choice areas will receive a paper questionnaire in the first mailing, and again in the fourth mailing if they have not yet responded. So we know that that households will all get a questionnaire before non-response follow-up at least once. Next, we will turn to the language support program. As we know, in-language materials are critical to ensuring our community has the information they need to effectively participate in the census. We know that more than a majority of Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders speak a language other than English at home, and that significant portions of our communities are limited English proficient. The Census Bureau has announced its language support plan, which will include 12 non-English languages for the Internet questionnaire and telephone assistance. Those languages are Spanish, Chinese, Simplified / Mandarin, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Japanese. There will be another 59 non-English languages that will get language glossaries, language identification cards, as well as language guides, both in video and print. And I often think of the language guides as sort of like a sample ballot, if you will, where someone can take the guide and it will help them guide them through the English language questionnaire, so that they will still have to fill out the English language questionnaire, but they'll have the in-language guide to be able to understand what is going on. Note that there will also be video and print shells that can be utilized for languages outside of the Census Bureau's list. While that is, good that there is this opportunity, it still does put the burden on CBOs to produce the actual translations. So the Census Bureau made its determinations about which languages to include in its program and for what purposes by looking at ACS, American Community Survey data, looking at both the languages spoken at home by households and for linguistically isolated households. That is one where everyone 14 and older is LEP. They next verified their language list against regional and state level data and assessed the feasibility of translations for each program. They then produced a language list for their program that they have shared and that I'm sharing with you today. This slide has all the languages that will be supported in some form by the 2020 Census Language Program. The languages bolded in the left column are the languages for the translated Internet questionnaire and for their telephonic assistance. The remaining languages are the languages for the language guides, glossaries, and identification cards. So the Census Bureau has made some improvements with their 2020 Census Language Program. Because of the lower threshold, where they use a 60,000 cutoff as opposed to 100,000, there are 7 more languages covered for the Internet self-response and census questionnaire assistance. Another improvement is the ability of respondents to respond over the phone. Each of the 13 supported languages, including English, for the Internet questionnaire will have its own toll-free number for callers. Respondents calling the English and Spanish language lines are presented with a self-service interactive voice response system offering an assortment of automated responses to frequently asked questions. At any time, respondents may opt to transfer to a customer service representative who is prepared to further assist and enumerate them. All callers who need assistance in the other languages will be connected directly to a customer service representative fluent in the language based on the toll-free number to call. One thing to note is that unlike the previous census, a person calling into the helpline or the toll-free number will actually be able to have their responses recorded, that is, be enumerated or counted over the phone. In the previous census, the customer service representative could answer questions and then could send out a paper questionnaire to people, but could not actually count them. So this is something that could be beneficial for our community, and something that is certainly an improvement from 2010. Well, while we saw improvements, we are also concerned about the following issues with the language program. First, there's only one American Indian language, Navajo. There are no Alaskan Native languages covered, and no Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander languages on their list. This is a loss of coverage compared to 2010. For the 2010 language list, 9 additional languages were selected based on requests from both the Asian American and the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Race and Ethnicity Advisory Committees. All of the missing languages that were added in 2010 that are currently not on the 2020 list are Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander languages. Additionally, there will be no in-language printed questionnaire besides Spanish and English. So these are gaps that we see in the language support program, and we have been and will continue to advocate for improvements on these points of concern. As we near this portion of the webinar, I want to flag a last-minute change to the 2020 census plan that many of you, I'm sure, are aware of, and that will certainly negatively impact our ability to accurately count our community. And that is the addition of a citizenship question to the 2020 census form. In December 2017, DOJ sent a request to the Census Bureau for the addition of a new citizenship question on the 2020 census. In late March, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross announced his decision to add an untested and unnecessary question on citizenship to the 2020 census form. Recently, there was an opportunity for the public to weigh in on the citizenship question and more. Through our collective campaign across the progressive sector, more than 250,000 individuals and organizations urged the removal of the citizenship question. These organizations represented millions of people from every state and the District of Columbia, as well as diverse urban and rural communities. For more information on the citizenship question, you can check out our fact sheets and tune in for a future webinar on this topic. On this slide, you'll see some of our upcoming webinars. Please be on the lookout for an announcement of our next webinar on how people are counted in the census. And following that, we will take a look and do a deeper dive into communications, as I mentioned previously, both with respect to our research and what we're seeing and planning, as well as what the Census Bureau is looking at doing. And then in November, we will do a deeper dive on the race and ethnicity questions, talking about how to answer it, what different options are, and so forth. So at this time, I would like to open the discussion up for questions. And here is contact information for a number of us on staff here. And we are happy to answer any questions you have both today, and or if you have questions that you think of later, please email us at census@advancingjustice-aajc.org.
All right, and to ask questions, you can either raise your hand on GoToWebinar, we can unmute your line, or you can send them right into the chat box. So we have our first question from Manor. When will the second comment period happen for the citizenship question?
From what we understand, that will happen a little bit later, potentially in the fall. And certainly as we get more information about that and how people can take advantage of that opportunity, we will make sure to reach out and let you all know.
Thank you. Again, you can raise your hand or you can type your question into the chat box. All right, well, it seems like we don't have any additional questions. If you find after this webinar that you do have a question, you can reach out to us at census@advancingjustice-aajc.org. Again, that's the email that's on the slide in front of you. And as follow-up to this webinar, we will send you the presentation from today's webinar as well as a recording of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on a future Census webinar.